When we are taught about the history of America, historians began with the founding of Jamestown. We are told that the people who settled this country came from Britain and other European countries. But no one ever asked where these people of Europe and Britain came from. Now, our forefathers that founded this country believed that they were the descendants of the ancient Israelites. But is there any evidence of that? The original settlers of America were from Europe, Britain, Scotland, and Ireland. But where did the Western Europeans come from? The Europeans were the descendants of the Germanic tribes. Now, if you look at the quote from the encyclopedia, it says the following: the main movement from Asia into Europe, which went west of the Caucasus, was in the early times that of the Scythians. So who were the Scythians? Now, the Scythians were many tribes of people who lived above the Black Sea. They came to Scythia around the 6th century BC. But what do we know about these people? Now, everything that we know about the Scythians comes from Herodotus, who was the father of history. He said the Scythians settled the Black Sea area around 700 BC. They did not eat pork, neither did they allow pigs to be raised in their land. They did not allow any pagan customs of the Greeks, and they were a people of exile. Now, many people today believe that the Scythians were the descendants of the Israelites. But is there any proof that they came from the land of Israel? We know that all nationalities came originally from the Middle East, and that it was called the cradle of civilization. But is there any proof that the Scythians came from the land of Israel? And yes, we're going to find there is. The first proof we're going to look at is a quote from a medieval Jewish historian named Eldad. And he's writing about the 10 tribes of Israel after the fall of Samaria. And this is what he says: the first immigration of the Israelites in the Caucasus is recounted in the Armenian and Georgian chronicles. According to these chronicles, Israel arrived in the region as early as the 6th century BC. The first arrivals were probably free merchants, while the later partly came as captives. He said also the following: they evaded the calamity, going off with their herds, turning nomad, and the chiefs among them mustered 120,000 horsemen and 100,000 foot soldiers. Now, the most astounding proof is the tombstones that are found in the area of Scythia. Many of them show that there were Israelites there. Now, in the Traces of Dispersion by Terry Blodgett, he states that Croson and other Russian archaeologists found more than 700 Hebrew inscriptions north of the Black Sea. Now, the Jewish Encyclopedia backs this up, and they say the tombstones were discovered dating from the 4th and 5th century, one of them with an inscription in Aramaic. This is the tombstone of Buki, the son of Isaac the priest. May his rest be in Eden at the time of the salvation of Israel, in the year 702 of the years of our exile. Now, the book of Ezra used to be part of the Bible, and it was part of the Bible from the time of Nehemiah all the way up to 1885. In 1885, it was removed from the Bible. It is a historical account of Israel. And so we're going to read a quote from the book, and it's going to tell us about where Israel went. Those are the tribes which were carried away captive out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, while Salmaneser the king of Assyria took captive and crossed them beyond the river so that they were brought to another land. But they took counsel to themselves that they would leave the multitude of heathen and go further into a further country where never man dwelt, that they may keep the statutes which they never kept in their own land. And they entered in at a narrow pass of the river Euphrates. For the Most High then showed them signs and stayed the spring of the floods until they passed over. For through the country there was a great journey, even a year and a half, and the same region is called Aserath. Now this is a map of Aserath, and notice it's above the Black Sea area, and it's a Hebrew word which means another land. Now the ancient historian Herodotus tells us that the Scythians traveled with their families through the Caucasus mountains using covered wagons. Now this mountain range is where we get the word Caucasian. It's a mountain range that's located in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Now today, the entrance of the Caucasus Mountains is called Dariel Pass, and the archaeologist Daniel Crowson said that there was a actual inscription in the wall of the mountain, and it says Right Israel, meaning the gates of Israel in Hebrew. Now this is more evidence that these people passed through this area and went to the area of Scythia. Now there's a river in the northwest corner of the Black Sea area, and in ancient times it was called Serath, and today it's called Saret. Now this is another historian that tells us that the tribes of Israel went into the area of Arcerath. Now I'm going to read you a quote. Artellus says, the kingdom of Arcerath, where the 10 tribes retired, took the name of Gothe, which is another word for Goth. Now there's many rivers in Europe that are named after the Israelites, but there's a special river between Norway and Russia that's called Gräs Jakob Elv, which means Jacob's border river. It actually separates Europe from the rest of the world. It's a separating river that is between Russia and Norway. Another proof that the Israelites were there. Now the Scottish people believed that they were the Israelites, and in 1320 they received their independence from Britain. They wrote their Declaration of Independence document, and in that document they stated that their ancestors came from Scythia, and they also crossed the Red Sea as the Israelites. Now I'm going to read you some of that document. They journeyed from Greater Scythia by the way of the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Pillar of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course of time in Spain among the most savage tribes. Thence they came 1,200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea to their own home in the west, where they still live today. Now the Spartans also believed that they were the Israelites, and they sent a letter to the high priest of Israel where they called themselves the kinsmen of the Israelites. Now let's read a piece of that letter. The chief magistrates in the city of Sparta send greetings to Simon the chief priest, and to the elders and the priests for the rest of the Jewish people, our kinsmen. Now a Cambridge professor named A.M. Jones wrote a book called Sparta, and in it he states that The Spartans celebrated the new moons and the seventh day, which is exactly what the Israelites did. Now, even Queen Elizabeth claims to be a descendant of the Israelites. Now, this is a chart of her genealogy. This is found in the Westminster Abbey. Notice it starts with Abraham, and it includes all the kings of Judah, even Teotaphi. Now, Teotaphi was the princess that was brought to Ireland by Jeremiah. She married into the kings of Ireland, proving that the kings of Ireland ascended from King David and that they're Jewish. So this is very interesting here. Now, under the Queen's coronation chair is a stone. It's called Jacob's pillar stone. The legend tells us that this stone was used as the coronation stone for the kings of Judah in the land of Israel. But what we do actually know about it is that it was taken from the Scottish by King Edward of England, and the Scots brought it from Ireland. Now, this is one of the most astounding proofs that Israel lived across the Red Sea in the area of Scythia. Now, Josephus, the historian during the first century, records this. He said the 10 tribes are beyond the Euphrates till now and are an immense multitude and not to be estimated by numbers. Now, that area across the Euphrates was Parthia. And the Parthians actually extended from the area of Scythia down below the Black Sea. And they were a huge empire. They actually went to war 13 times with Rome, and Rome was never able to defeat them. Now, this is a map of the Parthian Empire. Now, the Parthian Empire would fall in 226 AD to Persia. And at that point, the people in Parthia would move back up into the area of Scythia with their kinsmen. Now, George Rollins wrote the history of the Parthians, and there's a lot of similarities between the Parthians and the Israelites. They were a kinsman to the Scythians, they were an exiled people, and they used the same language as the people in the Middle East, which was Aramaic. He also said that the Parthians named their cities with Israelite names, such as Dara, Gaza, and Samaria. The kings had Phar in their names, and this comes from Pharez, which was the kings of Judah. Now see the coin, it has a face of a Caucasian monarch. Now, using the Bible as a history book, the Messiah and the disciples knew exactly where the lost tribes were. Now, I want to prove that by reading the following, Matthew 10:5. These 12 Jesus sent forth, commanding them, saying, Go not into the ways of the Gentile, or into any city of the Samaritans, enter ye not, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, the Messiah and the disciples knew exactly where they were. They were not lost. Now, this is the Behistun stone. It was created by King Darius of Persia. On this stone, we are told that the people of Scythia were called Saka. That is S-A-K-A. And we get that word from Isaac. Now, Ptolemy, the famous geographer, says that the Scythian people sprang from Saka, named Saxons. So now you begin to see that the Scythians, the Saka, and the Saxons were the same people. According to the British Museum, the Israelites were called by many names. The Babylonians called them the Cimbres, the Assyrians called them the Gimbres, the Persians called them the Saka, and the Greeks called them the Scythians. Now, the Bible tells us that the people of Israel would move north and west and into the land of Sinan. Let me read that. Isaiah 49:12. These shall come from far and low, and these from the north and from the west and from the land of Sinan which is Australia. Jeremiah 23:8, and the Lord liveth who brought them up, led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, and from all the countries where it was driven, and they shall dwell in their own land. So it's mentioning that they were in the north and in the west. Now, using the Middle East as a starting point, you can see that Europe is in the north and Britain and America is in the west. So those are the places that the Bible said that the Israelites would be mainly concentrated. But would these people still be around in our time? And I believe that the Bible tells us the answer. Genesis 49:1, and Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Now this is showing that the Israelites would still be around, live and well, even in the last days.